Dominic.
Jenna.
Hey, it's another hot one, as they say.
Oh boy, yes, it has been. It's been brutal this week. I've
It
lost so
really.
much weight just from like walking in my neighborhood. It's like my all my clothes are sticking to me.
Well, I thought today because okay, so for where we are in New York State, or in New York State, just period, the 90 something heat wave has finally theoretically broken. So I was like,
Wow.
great, this is like I can open the windows again and have fresh air in the house and like all this other stuff. And I don't know, somewhere around 10 o'clock, I was like, is that sweat dripping down my back? And that's when I
Yes.
realized it's still really humid, so I got to put the
It's
AC on.
yes. It's not 95. It's 90 or it's going to go up to it's like yes, you just barely a couple of degrees we've just saved ourselves, but it is still brutal. I went into the city on yesterday. I took the
Uh-huh.
train in and I was just like, I don't go into the city as often as I used to. Even before the pandemic, but it's like being on that subway platform, there's nothing worse.
I believe it. I believe it. All right. Well, shall we start the show?
Sounds good.
Hi, I'm Jenna,
And I'm Dom, and we're both award winning journalists.
who've recently been laid off.
Our industry is experiencing a seismic shift, and it's shed a lot of really good journalists.
So, where does that leave us? Well, we're definitely laid off.
And we're looking for new jobs, looking for what's left of the industry, and what to do next.
And we're looking at all of it. So, if you're a fellow laid off journalist, a working journalist, or someone who admires the craft, we're looking to build community.
Develop new skills, and try to figure out what just happened.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking. Somehow I feel like this oppressive, humid heat, though, is somehow a metaphor for something larger.
We're living it in the news right now. Yes.
Yes. Yes, the
We're
weirdest thing that I've found at least is because so now that I'm freelancing for New York State Public Radio is that there's like there's all of this news happening at the national level
Mhm.
and kind of nothing happening locally. And it's this weird like dichotomy or something. Like it's so strange. It's so strange. Like I feel like, I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel here.
If we weren't in an election year, I don't know if we'd be saying that in terms of how much. I mean, it's not just a presidential election year. It's also the craziness of everything that's happening. I mean, hello,
It's
a
extra
debate,
crazy. Oh my
that debate,
God. I'm
and yeah,
still
yes. And then, of course, this past weekend, you have an assassination
yeah,
attempt.
which uh, I yeah, like I don't yeah, I still don't have words for that. Other than like it was absolutely terrible. And of course, in the immediate aftermath, first I went to Twitter just to be like,
Mhm.
well, I guess I'll ask you in a minute, but the way
Mhm.
I first found out was that I was at a friend's house, just chit chatting, having a nice glass of wine or whatever, and my phone starts blowing up, and I'm like, "What?" And I look at my phone and I see like text messages from some of my friends being like, "Oh my God, somebody shot at like Donald Trump." So I was like, "What?" So then I go to Twitter, and not for Twitter too. I'm looking for because I follow a lot of like serious journalists to see has anybody verified this or is this just something and I see, a lot of them are tweeting, like, from reporters who were there on the scene. So I'm seeing video, oh my God, this happened. Um, and then, of course, in the aftermath, because as one of the things that we can talk about is that news takes time to germinate. So, of course,
Mhm.
people want to talk about it right away. And I'm seeing all kinds of insane stuff on social media in the immediate aftermath. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is so bad because first of all, I I understand the nihilistic urge to turn everything into a joke. I really do because oh my god, do we all need a dark, sick laugh? But I don't think people really are grasping how bad it would be if that became the place that we go to. where now people on the campaign stump are getting assassinated. Like that's a really, really dark place for this country. But anyway, Dom, where were you? How did you find out?
I was at a family birthday party, and my sister was driving. It was in New Jersey, and we were driving home, and apparently the news broke while I went to the restroom, and I came back, and we left the party, and my sister was like, "Wow, that's really crazy about, you know, the assassination attempt." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she was like, "Didn't you hear?" I was like, "No." And so I s- honestly, I didn't know if it was, I really did. My first thing that went to my head was, is this like some kind of deep fake or AI generated bullshit? Because I didn't buy it right away when I heard it. It sounded so far-fetched. Then I looked online, I'm like, oh no, it is definitely, when I saw that, I was like, wow, this is crazy. What happened? That's just, um, I was just very concerned too, just because of how the turnaround rate for what people expect in terms of our news.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't get answers right away, a few things happen. One thing, people start believing that the truth is being kept from them. Um, and exactly. And then, feeling like nobody's telling us the truth because they don't want us to know. That's one thing. So what ends up happening then is a lot of theories start, or a lot of ideas start popping up of what they think the truth is. And then what ends up happening for me is it becomes so much more difficult then for when the actual truth comes out.
Yeah.
And for those same people, been ingrained so much with what they want to believe or what they believed. And then that makes the truth like, well, it's out there, but does anybody really care? That to me is what I think is a little bit uh, sort of going through my mind.
Well, if I can quote Mark Twain, I believe, and I Googled this to make sure I got it correct, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. And I
Yeah,
feel like that is
yeah.
working in news 100%.
And I think there really is also, I would assume, working at a newsroom. Well, before we even get there, I'm very curious for you. How did it feel for you not, not working in this space where we were working, where we were covering breaking stories? How did it feel to not have to feel like you had to be on it in that capacity?
Well, this was probably the first time that I was really in that space. Because again, I like got out of college and almost immediately started working in newsrooms. So it's taken me some time to, not have that flinch that
Hmm.
like, oh my God, we got it. Like, so to just sort of sit back and watch it, it was kind of surreal. There's still a part of me that's still, I don't know, maybe judging is the correct word, but still thinks about like how I would want to cover the
Hmm.
story or like what are the conversations or the points that I would want to make sure got brought up behind the scenes in, in whatever that news meeting was. Um, but also, I mean, there's a tiny part of me, as weird as it is, that does kind of miss that because there's when news breaks in a live newsroom, there's this like adrenaline rush that almost comes like physically comes into the room, and everybody immediately gets on whatever their job is, and like this one's doing this and this one's doing that, and like everybody, it's almost like as wonky as a newsroom can be, and like competing personalities and agendas or whatever. When news breaks in a at least a well-staffed newsroom, it's like watching a machine suddenly come alive and all the gears are working together and everything's happening and there's just like weird adrenaline rush. And it is an adrenaline rush because there's
Hmm.
been more than a few breaking news
Hmm.
stories that have happened where if news broke, I don't know, let's say like 12 or 1 o'clock or something, it'll be 6 before any of us are just like, wait a second, I haven't eaten in an hour. And that's normal. And so there is like an aspect of, that like that rush that I do miss, but this time it was kind of just like, I don't know, y'all handle it.
Yeah, I did not. I was very grateful not having to be there this time for this story. I've been there for hurricanes,
Mhm.
tornadoes,
Mhm.
deaths of popes, and you
Mhm.
know, and all these like political people and whatever's going on in the world. And you know, I the difficulty with you're right. You do get an you do have an adrenaline rush when you're covering these stories because you do work as a unit if you're working as a good unit. Um, my I think the issue is you can burn out on it because a lot of times, especially, breaking news it does become a little more complicated today because like, a lot of people are trying to be first. And with that comes the push sometimes
without
that,
any concern about whether or not they're right,
and
or
with
less
that,
concern. Yeah.
and don't you find Jenna too, so like that also makes it difficult because then when the truth sometimes does come out, and I'm not saying about everything, but I do think a lot of good reporting doesn't get the credit it always deserves because of the
Yep.
fact that it's kind of gotten buried. And
Yeah.
therefore, so it makes it a little different. I think what I definitely still do is I still look at various news sources. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't just follow one online entity. I go through a whole bunch of different. I love seeing who else is saying things, whether local
How
or
different places are framing it. Yeah.
because I do want to have a sense of what's going on. And again, I know that people want answers right away. We all do. We live in a society that everything's like, I just saw that. Why did this person do it? Why is this happening? What's the truth? And when you don't have, like right now, at least of this recording, you know, we still don't have answers. There's still like some small pieces of information that we hear. But that's the part that I'm kind of glad because I feel like it's gotten so much more difficult. You struggle because everything's about what's new, what's new, what's new, and it's a constant. By the time you actually put it out there, it's old until
No,
you're
that's
the one.
very, very true. And also with this whole new concept of, I guess, like news influencers, for example,
Hmm.
um, it like, some of them I was already seeing them like rushing to their social media page with their phone to give their hot take on what effectively is all you've got is like a headline. We don't know enough yet, and yet people still feel compelled to create content around that, and there just isn't enough information. So what ends up happening is to fill that void, it's like, oh, well, I think or I've heard or whatever, and that's all just rumor and conjecture. You don't know what the facts are yet. But yes, by the time, it takes a minute to get a story together.
Hmm.
And even for reliable news sources, I was finding that a lot of people were, jumping to um like man on the street, like eyewitness accounts, which again, traditionally I think do hold a very important place
Totally.
in news. But I'm starting to wonder now, given how partisan our country has become, and given how hyper aware everybody is about, not only being on camera, but what they say and how that can be used to shape and frame a story going forward. Um, how that colors how they interact with reporters.
That's really interesting because I know um someone was bringing up to me, oh wow, I heard this happened. This is I don't know if it was like the same day or if it was the next day, but they were saying, "Oh no, it was the same day." Like, "Oh, they had eyewitness saying this and this
Mhm.
and this happened." I'm like, "Well, let's just take a beat because we don't know for sure." Because honestly, sometimes people see what they want to see. Sometimes people get caught up emotionally in the story, and
Mhm.
sometimes people want to feel like they're the ones who saw it and nobody else did, and they want, you know what I mean? I
No,
understand it.
because it makes you feel special.
It does. And there's lots of, and this goes for any time you're covering a breaking news story. It's not just about this. People have to just wait before you jump on board the train because once we started seeing more videos and there was more corroboration about what was being said, it was like, okay, now I can believe it. But my whole thing is, why do you have to believe in that second right there? Why not just take a beat? Just okay, let's just wait and hear when we get more. But a lot of people don't like that. They want it there and then,
Yeah.
and they want to
Well,
believe it if it fits their agenda.
yeah, exactly. And there's been, stories and research that's basically indicated that the more time that goes between an event and when an eyewitness is asked to recall what they saw or whatever, a lot of their you know, ingrained or unconscious, let's say, biases start creeping into the story, and it can also change because there's been more than a few court cases, if I remember, where what was eyewitness testimony, and now we're talking like months after the event took place, um, was incorrect. And some people were, jailed and convicted over an incorrect eyewitness testimony. Now, I'm not saying that's the case with what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, because, of course, those were people who were speaking literally moments afterwards. There was a whole
Mm-hmm.
press corps
Mm-hmm.
there. So, but still, there's so many factors that go into, eyewitness accounts. Um, so yeah. And sometimes the other weird thing I will say is, having worked as a reporter in the field, sometimes the most articulate people, which is, and this is one of the ironies, uh, are going to be the ones who will be most inclined to say, no, I don't want to talk to the press. I want to, sort of process on my own, etc. And the people who, let's say, don't reach that bar, they're the ones who are like, you want a soundbite? I'll give you a soundbite. And that's one of the things that I don't know if people appreciate. It's like, listen, I had to get man on the street, and these are the only people who would talk to me.
The man on the street interviews, to me, I always hated doing those. It was always the most awkward because now I can't speak about other places. I've only done it in New York City and Manhattan, and or
That's
pretty much in
enough.
Manhattan, and I have to say people don't want to talk to you. And if they do, the ones who do are usually, there's a small percentage who end up being giving you really, good sound bites.
Hmm.
Most people who end up doing it, then it's always just, it's not good.
Yeah.
It's the worst part of the job. I don't care what anybody tells me. It's a terrible part of of that job is getting the man on the streets. It's
No,
like,
there's been man on the street interviews where I've done where I'm standing there and I'm just like, I'm recording this, right?
yeah.
Like, you're saying these things into a microphone.
You do
All
realize
right.
this is going to up on air.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Whatever, dude. And it's even weirder. I mean, it's one thing maybe for radio, but it's even weirder when it's just like, you do see the cameraman right behind
Yeah.
me.
Oh, they do. Just don't care.
I guess so. We're in a new time. Well, okay, so I guess, yeah, like, how did, like, so I mean, how did it feel like? Just, I mean, there was an aspect of relief, at least to me, to,
Not covering it.
yeah,
Oh, I no, there was totally for me, there was definitely a relief for not feeling I had to jump on this story and cover
yeah.
it. It's again, it's very different consuming it as somebody who's just trying to inform oneself about the news. And I think that to me was I'm kind of comfortable being there right now. Like it was a really nice space. Like again, this politically, this is such a really um toxic time that we are in. I mean, don't you feel like it adds to the stress levels of how you're covering the stories
Oh, completely.
and
One of the things that I would always do was, because of course, there's going to be whatever the story is and how, internally we're
yeah,
following the story. And so, this is going to help us inform us with the questions that we're asking. But at the same time, for a lot of stories, I would also go to one degree or another social media. Now, I want to be crystal clear when I say this. I don't mean go to social media like, oh, let me see, like, not the most insane stuff, but a lot of times, um in comment sections around stories. And this could even be like on a newspaper's website or something, going through some of the comments or going through and seeing how people are talking about a story.
mm,
Because even with, the information that we have that we're presenting, that's informing the questions that we're asking, a lot of times I would find that there's still something that the public's not getting, because they're still asking, like, well, how come this? Or I don't understand that. Or, well, what about this other issue? And I found it very helpful. I mean, sometimes there are ways to frame the conversation online in a very serious manner. And when I say serious, I just mean like taking away a lot of the hyperbole or the emotional jargon that fuels a lot of online conversation. But, like, a lot of people are still talking about the fact that they don't understand why X, Y, and Z. That can be helpful.
It can, and I think we're all, you know, even as a journalist or as a producer or somebody working in this field, you know, we're all in the same place. Like we're all asking the questions. And
Hmm.
sometimes that's the thing is that there are people out, there's a greater question being asked or something that maybe because you're so close and you're looking at it from a certain perspective that you do want to know what people are asking, what the public
Yeah.
is talking about, what is the most important aspect of that story, of what's being covered. Because sometimes, you know, it's good to sort of touch base with that and figure out what is, yeah, am I missing something? Is there anything else that isn't being talked about? Is there anything
No,
else
that
that
I
the
think
people
that's
do?
really legitimately an issue. And also for, the members of the public who do hear that, um, in a way, it almost makes them feel heard. Like, yeah, wait a second. That is the question that I've been wondering
Mhm.
that nobody else is talking about. But I, hear that from a particular journalist. I feel like, you somehow heard me.
Mhm.
And that's always been one of my North Stars that I've always taken to journalism is the infamous Dom quote, I have a voice. For me, it's everybody really just wants to feel heard. And especially in a media environment that's so loud and, sometimes convoluted and confusing, for someone to feel like, wait a second, I genuinely feel like somebody has heard my concern can mean everything.
Kind of probably why, you know, social media in terms of taken off so much, and especially in terms of when we're talking about it's not just news, but I mean, I'll focus on the news aspect, but I do think it's that very issue is you have a chance to be heard by millions of people.
Mhm.
Um, it's not guaranteed, but there's a chance. And a
Mhm.
lot of people who I'll see all the time, like, I just did this and I didn't know that this got picked up everywhere. I had no idea my opinion or my thoughts would be picked up by everyone. And I think that's something that I makes people feel like, well, I deserve to have my voice heard too. And
Yeah.
it serves a purpose. It has its place. I just think it's not journalism all the time. I'm not saying everybody isn't,
No.
but I do think that and this is where again people might not feel, but you know, journalism doesn't fit within. That's where journalism has to kind of like figure out its own place too, of like hearing the voice of the people while also still remaining neutral and saying just because that's being asked doesn't mean that's the right. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, no,
sometimes
that's
like,
yeah.
or if that is being asked, this is what we can answer of that.
But
But
I think I will say that I do think it's one thing to ask a question that the public is really grappling with
mhm,
versus attempting to set the public discussion agenda by
mhm.
asking, because I've also seen people do that where it's just like, this isn't a question. You're trying to like set the
Lead
agenda.
me. You're trying to
Yes,
lead.
there you go.
You know,
Almost
we
makes me wish you could like object in an interview.
yes, that's a good
Objection,
idea.
Your Honor. That's a
Objection.
leading question.
I love that idea.
Oh,
You
that
know,
would get abused as well.
you know, of course, again, we had this really terrible situation that happened, you know, and if a life was lost and people were
Oh,
injured,
that
it
would have
was
been,
terrible.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
and,
life was lost, so that was also terrible.
and there's a lot that happened there that's terrible, but you know, there was also, in a different way too, there's the whole issue of other stories that sort of happened. And, you know, there were, of course, sad, but, you know, Dr. Ruth Westheimer passing away, Richard Simmons passing away,
Poor
Shannon
Shannon
Doherty
Doherty. Yeah.
passing away. Like you had three, um, you know, three individuals who really, you know, we talked about their stories and how that kind of was you what we were talking about, like how that affects their story. They're being heard too, you know, with people still talking
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Well, yeah, no, I completely agree. And speaking of such things, I'm forgetting her name already again, which I guess is part of the problem. There was another celebrity who died at the beginning of the weekend. She was the woman who played Olive Oil.
Oh, Shelley Duvall, you're
There we go.
right.
Yes, it started with Shelley Duvall and
That
then
was
came
Friday?
Dr. I think so.
Oh
And then
wow.
came
I
Dr.
remember
Ruth,
last week, you're
and
right.
then came Richard Simmons, and then came Shannon Doherty. Um, I guess in the name of poor Shelley Duvall, I'm just like she died too. She was a
She
person.
did. She did. Well, see, it's funny you think of her as I automatically go to her for The Shining. I
You
always
know, I
that movie.
never saw The Shining.
Oh,
I was too
Jenna.
little at the time, and now I'm just like, do I really need to do that to myself? My psyche is
Oh,
hanging on by a thread.
oh my goodness, that's it. It's iconic. It's I know that it's one of those films that's very divisive in terms of how people love or hate it, but it's
Uh-huh.
she's her performance. I grew to really appreciate her performance over the years. When I was younger, when I was a kid and I saw it, I just didn't get it. Of course, because I was a kid, but as in my older years, and I said, like, wow, she's terrifying in a different way. It's really good. But yeah, all those stories of people, like they all had big impacts on our, you know what I
Huge
mean? Like with,
impacts, yeah.
and there are other stories too. It's like there are other news stories that that sort of get pushed to the sidelines because of this is a huge story and needs to be covered totally. But that's always the interesting part too, is what happens to those stories that happen and people don't hear about it.
Well, that's also like I mean, quite a few of my friends have basically not basically, they just said to me point blank, "Listen, Jenna, I love you. I understand what you do for a living, but I can't with this news cycle anymore. So you
Mhm.
cannot tell me anything. I really can't. I can't." And while on one hand I do respect that, but I do sometimes I guess I always worry about what happens if you check too far out. And listen, I understand that the news cycle has, and it has for the last few years. And a lot of that has to do with, again, being first, getting people's attention, holding their attention, social media, that it feels like it's moving at this breakneck pace. Like, I think back to when I was a kid in the 80s or, a young adult in the 90s. And yeah, everything like, even going back and watching movies from those times, like, everything just moved so much slower, and so, yeah, I get how it can feel exhausting, but I guess my concern is just, like, dip out is one thing, but completely
I agree.
disengage feels dangerous, um, because you have to find a way to stay informed, but on that
It's a
note,
fine line. Yeah, it's a
yes,
fine line.
even journalists reach their limit because I've reached no, there was like after the news of,
Yeah,
the assassination attempt happened,
yeah.
then by I don't know, maybe by like Sunday mid-morning or something, I was like, okay, there's nothing new happening here. I can't and I really can't anymore. So my question to you, Dom,
Mhm.
because I know what I did,
Okay.
what's your favorite way to disengage when the news cycle just gets to be I can't anymore?
Oh, I mean, it's two things.
Okay.
Either I go to the movies,
Uh-huh.
I go to it, and I prefer to go to a movie theater, love my Alamo Draft House, or I watch reality TV.
Oh.
I need something to, I've been all over Love Island USA this whole summer. I've watched
No,
over
but that
30
like but
episodes.
people sometimes are always just like, "Oh, I can't believe you watched that." And I'm just like, "Here's what you need to understand. I have been immersed in like the
Hmm.
just relentless details, whatever. I need something so silly and stupid, it like washes my brain free."
Either I want to watch something that will distract me, like something really good that pulls me into another world that I can lose myself in it. Or and I need a movie theater to do it because I do everything in my apartment and I need to get the hell out of here sometimes. So it's sort of
Mhm.
like a nice dark theater where you have to turn your phone off and not allowed to talk. It's a way to really disengage from things, but for a
Oh,
short period of time. And then, and then reality TV because it's just so easy. And I watch
that's
certain
an
types.
aspect of the movie theater that I didn't think about. You have to turn your phone off.
Alamo, actually, that's something they tell you to do. I don't know if every other theater does that, but I know Alamo, and I think another one around here too, Nighthawk. They tell you like you have to turn your phone off or if what you could do is they have order cards on your table. So let's say if somebody has a phone on all the time, you could actually report them. And then if you get more than one warning, you get tossed out. I have yet to see anybody do that, but most people honestly have an honor code. That's what I appreciate. Most people go in with an honor code. They really do it. And I love it. People don't talk. They discourage
Yeah,
you
no,
from
that's
talking.
great.
It's there have been some times where I've been like, Jenna, I'm going to be gone from this time to this time because I don't check my phone. And I'm like, I'm going to be out for 2 hours. That's it, people.
Yeah.
And it really helps me. How about you? What do you like to
Um, okay, so this is making me feel terrible because now I'm like, maybe I should put down the phone. Um,
uh
so I just realized that TikTok now has like an app for my TV. So it's not
oh
like I
yeah.
can broadcast like there's, like a streaming thing where you can stream your
Yep.
phone on. No, 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 no. This
It's
is
their own app.
just you log in
Yep.
to the TikTok app and so I can just with my TV remote and I can just watch and I mean, there's a fair amount of just like stupid silly. Like there's some content creators who do voiceovers for animals that I absolutely love. Um there are some like very relaxing. I found like very weirdly there's a series of videos of just some guy cleaning filthy carpets or filthy rugs. I don't know what it is about it that's so zen and like, and there's something very ASMR about hearing with the scrubbing of the soap or whatever, but that's been very, very relaxing. So that's one thing that, like, and I can lose time if I do that. Like I have to be careful. It's not unusual for me to get like that. Hey, have you been scrolling thing? And I'm just like, swipe, keep going.
Yes, I do that too.
But yeah, that
I need to put on some type of parental guard on my own phone because I
I
it's
need to
so
be able to
tough.
personalize it, like so that we could do one for each other, where it's just like
Okay.
instead of that woman, Dom's face pops up and it's like, Jenna, it's been 2 hours. You know you have other stuff to do. Put down the phone. And then I'll be like, yeah, you're right, Dom.
Uh, I get all these beeps that go. I don't know how TikTok. It obviously I know I interact with it. I get it, but I always wonder how I got put on this chain, and it's just like of just like beefs that are going on between creators. You know what I mean? Don't get me started on the Clinton. What is it? Clinton Kane and Brooke Schofield drama. It's a whole thing. I
Oh,
can't
okay.
even.
I
They
can't. Every so often, I'll open the app, and then there's somebody else who's just like, so when such and such a creator like made their apology, and I just didn't buy it, and I'm just like, what the what now? The last time, okay, I'll end my TikTok conversation here,
Go
but
ahead.
the last time that I followed a TikTok drama, and if you know, you know, it was something called the Womblands. And basically it was this like there were two creators who had these very like progressive socially conscious platforms and they got together offline or on no not yeah offline in real life and it got messy. Of course it did. And then one of them brought the mess to the app in front of everybody. And then, of course, everything just, but that was the last time that I got involved. Now it feels like every other week there's some other content creator who like said something, the wrong thing, or said something that people disagreed with. And that's why you can't trust this one. And da da da. And I'm like, sometimes it feels a little too like, guys, like people are fallible is my take on it. Like
Yes,
you can
I think
still
some of them are.
yeah,
Yes.
like you can still
Yes,
be
many are.
very like, conscious and, still doing the right thing and doing the work or whatever, but yeah, people are going to make mistakes. Like
I
what is this
agree.
world where no one is able to make it? Well, you should have known. I'm just like that's literally not how human beings work at all.
I
Even
agree.
people
I
who
think there's
do know make
different
they fall.
I agree with you 100%. I think there's different degrees of what um people screwing up and you know apologizing or how I mean every drama that happens is not really worth the drama. You know what I mean? Like people sometimes it's like not everything has to be this big. And sometimes like I've seen these things and I'm like, okay, this sounds like this is going to require too much because it doesn't sound like enough has happened on some of these stories.
Might be
Uh,
like some of them. Don't get me wrong. Curiosity, I will be like, okay,
yeah,
so what was it that so and so said that started off this whole thing? And if I can't find the answer within like, and I mean like a minute tops. This is not that deep. It's not. And then on top of that, does this any of this really
I
impact
know.
my life?
I know. That's the thing that I've tried to really get into. I'm
No.
sorry. I really did fall down this rabbit hole, the Clinton Kane Brooke Schofield thing, because they were just so she made like 15 videos. They dated a few years ago. They dated for like 6 months, and she basically was revealing, and she's done this before over the past couple of years, I think. I really didn't follow her before this. And she was just saying about how he's faking his Australian accent. He's a singer. He's a singer on TikTok. That's where he's sort of he has a song that I think that really broke for him was called Chicken Tendies. And I know Jenna's rolling her eyes for those not
Already, like,
able to see
I
this.
I care because you care, but I'm struggling to care. But
Jenna. And
continue.
then she said he faked his Australian accent. He told her that his mom, this is all alleged. I want to be very clear, all alleged.
Yeah.
She's alleging that he did an interview with Rolling Stone, a few other people where he said his mom had passed away, his dad passed away, who actually did, and his brother passed away, but end up finding out that the mother's still alive. And so allegedly, I think is the brother. I don't know. It's just, and he's not from, he doesn't have an accent. Because when you're watching these interviews, like, huh, for somebody who's Australian, who has an Australian accent, he sounds like he doesn't have an accent at all. And it's
So it sounds kind of like he created a persona for himself to help sell his
uh,
music and then just got
probably,
busted and part of like the part that
probably,
was real and the part maybe that he
and
expanded on for the sake of the story.
he's not helping himself because then he did like a 29-part series rebutting everything she said, but
Oh
except the important things.
my God,
I know
who has the
this is what I get like,
time?
but you know what? It's like but again, sometimes you dive in on those stories, like you said, that really have absolutely no impact on our lives.
Yeah,
But
the last one I will say was the Womblands. And then after that, I think I was just like, you know what? I think I'm good.
yes, at
I don't
some
need to,
point,
like, this has no impact on my life. Some of the videos, in response were funny,
yeah,
etc. And that's what kept me engaged.
yeah.
But like when it's just like, outrage post after outrage post and I'm disgusted and this is why you can't trust or whatever, blah, 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 blah. Just I mean, if you want to live your life that way, whatever. Like swipe, I can't. I just
But
can't.
like you said, these are some of the things that we really do to just kind of unwind. It's silly. I mean, it's silly in the sense of how it's sometimes being presented. It's something like you said
Oh
that
yeah.
we're made to feel like this is the biggest thing in our lives too. When to be real, I mean, Brooke has a hit podcast and she's doing well for herself and she's told her truth, according to her. And, that's it. It's like they're fine. I mean, he'll sell records.
So I wonder though, going back to our original conversation, how
Mhm.
much of the way that because okay, TV cable people are cutting the cord. People are starting to cut their streaming services because that's become like I won't say which platform it was, but I had watched a series that was very much hyped on one of the platforms, and when I saw it I was just like this was not worth the hype. Like clearly you guys did not put the work into this. And there were some good actors in that series. But anyway, so I'm one people are spending more and more time, it seems to me, online engaging with content
Mhm.
there. How much of the expectations of audience engagement and the way people engage with content and mistakes or whatever on TikTok are bleeding into the way people are now trying to um encourage newsmakers and journalists to engage with traditional media? And does it even bleed over and does it work or not? Like
Um,
I'm just wondering like if people are expecting like this much of if that's become the norm where like if something happens and then
right,
there's like all of these reactions and then
right.
there's people explaining why this is terrible and this person's a horrible person and you should never
Yeah,
listen to them
yeah,
and I'm perfect until it turns out oh I made a mistake because again
yeah,
humanity
yeah.
um how much of that is bleeding over into the work that we
Uh,
do? Because every single job that I see posted is very much a, um, can you also do digital media? Like everybody wants it, but nobody really seems to know what they want to do with it just yet.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say if I know that it's happening, if I've noticed it happening now, but I think that it's something that will impact because I think what people have noticed with this is just my little opinion. I just think that what they find is compelling is all about keeping people engaged, and you want to tell these short sort of story. It's just storytelling, and it's
Yeah.
done in that way of like, let's just like here 2 minutes. Here's this part of the story. Next part, I'm going to tell you this one. You leave a
Two
cliffhanger.
minutes. Sometimes, yeah. It's like do a minute,
Sometimes it's
follow
more.
for
You're
part
right.
two. I
As
see that a
long as
lot. Yep.
but it you but I know that you have to keep people on, I think, at least 1 minute before you start getting money for those videos, if I'm correct. At least on
Something,
TikTok.
yeah, like so you have something about like 10,000 followers and then a certain amount of engagement and just all these
I
rules and
there was my
regulations and just like, okay.
know that because some creator was saying that he's like, well, I made this video at least a minute so I can get monetized off of it.
Okay, then
Um,
that sounds about
that's
right from what
but
I've heard.
but let's but again, it's all about yeah, I could see that doing a multi-part series um is can be really it kind of keeps people coming back. They know what your brand is. They know the kind of stories. I think it is. I think there'll be different forms of storytelling for news. There'll be traditional, like more traditional covering certain topics, but then there'll be other people maybe covering different parts of the news stories, news cycle, doing it differently. Like it, it is it is work. You mentioned this earlier, and I meant to say because you mentioned something about how in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, like you were talking about films, but also content were
Yeah.
slower,
Yeah.
slower paced, right? And that's true. I mean, you look at how stories are told today. People look. That's why sometimes people watch something from the 90s and they'll be like, "Oh my goodness, it's so like, oh come on, hurry up! Like it's so slow." It's like yes, because it was a slower. It was a it was slower paced. We didn't
Yeah.
have the type of editing. We didn't have that's not the way news was. Sometimes I look at these videos and I'm like, did you speed up? And sometimes they have. I've seen people
Sometimes they have.
creators.
The other thing that I've noticed, and okay, we've been talking so much about TikTok, but this is like really starting because I feel like TikTok is driving the video content that's on the digital platforms that now everybody else is chasing to try to get clicks on. Okay, so here's the thing.
Yeah.
I've noticed sometimes when people will post something and they'll add text to their video, they'll change the text screen. Like the text screen won't last that long, so it forces you to pause so you can read whatever the text is before they move on to the next thing. Therefore, it's for the app is seeing that people are staying on this story, watching it multiple times and pausing it or
Mhm.
whatever. Thus, anyway. There's just all these like little tricks that people have figured out, and I just,
And they all want to copy it. To be real, that's what
well,
all
that's
these
what I'm
different
thinking. Yeah.
platforms
And
they
when
want to
you say
copy.
platforms, you mean like traditional mainstream media.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, well, yes, actually, yes. I mean that not talking about you. I mean, YouTube, all those things, that's what they're doing anyway. That is keeping you there. But now you have New York Times and all these other, but obviously they're a lot larger, so that for them it's a little different. But that's what I think it makes it much more competitive for smaller
Yeah.
uh organizations to kind of how do you find your space when you have these big platforms who are just like eating everything up because they have the money and they have the reach? It's so difficult. And then that changes what stories get told and what stories don't get told. So
All right. Well, I
interesting
think
times.
it is incredibly interesting times. On that note, we're going to leave it and we're going to continue working behind the scenes and we'll be back again next week with another episode.
Bye, Jenna. Bye,
All
everyone.
right. Bye, everybody. Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia. Music provided by Jay Cowett, research by Lori Ruthenbucker. Reach out to us anytime at laidofandlookingpod@gmail.com. New episodes drop every Friday at noon.